The road to the monastery vanished long before the fear did. Even the wind seemed to retreat from the mountains, as if something unseen claimed the silence as its own. By the time I reached the last broken milestone, I already felt like I had crossed into a place that did not want me alive. No map marked the path ahead, yet the trail pulled me forward like a quiet command. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a faint metallic scent that clung to my throat. I tried to convince myself it was just the altitude, but something in me knew it wasn't. Villagers in the last town had refused to speak of this place directly. They would only glance toward the mountains, their faces tightening with dread, before changing the subject. One old man whispered a single warning before turning away, saying some silences are louder than screams. I didn't believe in curses or shared superstitions, not before that journey began. Curiosity, mixed with a stubborn need to prove them wrong, drove me onward. Now each step felt heavier, like the mountain itself was resisting my presence. The monastery revealed itself slowly through a curtain of mist. Its towering stone walls rose like a grave, carved into the mountainside, ancient and unmoving. There were no lights, no smoke, no signs of life, only a presence that pressed against my chest. As I approached the gate, I noticed the carvings etched into the stone. They depicted figures kneeling in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. I reached out to touch one, and for a moment I could swear the stone felt warm. The gate creaked open before I could knock, as if it had been expecting me. A monk stood there, his face hidden beneath a deep hood, his posture unnaturally still. He didn't greet me, didn't question me. He simply stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. Inside, the air felt heavier, like breathing through something unseen. The courtyard was vast, yet suffocating, surrounded by corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow. Not a single voice echoed, only the faint sound of my own footsteps. More monks appeared from the darkness, their movements slow and deliberate. Each one kept their head lowered, avoiding my gaze as though eye contact itself was forbidden. Their silence wasn't peaceful. It was strained, like something was forcing it upon them. I tried to speak, to ask even the simplest question, but no one responded. One monk paused briefly beside me, his hand trembling before he quickly pulled it away. In that fleeting moment, I saw his face, and the terror in his eyes made my stomach twist. They led me to a small bare room with a narrow bed and a single candle. The monk who guided me pointed to the bed, then to the door, silently instructing me to stay. Before leaving, he hesitated, as if wanting to say something, but fear sealed his lips. When the door closed, the silence became unbearable. It pressed against my ears until I could almost hear something beneath it, a distant echo that didn't belong. And as night slowly fell over the monastery, I realized the silence here wasn't empty at all. It was waiting. The silence was not peaceful when morning came. It felt stretched thin, like something fragile that could tear at any moment. I woke with the strange certainty that I had been listening to something all night, even though I could not remember what it was. A dull grey light crept through the narrow window, revealing the bare stone walls around me. Dust hung in the air, as if it had been undisturbed for years. For a place filled with people, the monastery felt abandoned. I stepped into the corridor and immediately sensed movement without sound. Monks passed by like drifting shadows, their robes brushing the floor in perfect rhythm. Not one of them acknowledged my presence, as though I did not exist. They moved with an unsettling precision, each gesture deliberate and controlled. When two monks crossed paths, they communicated with brief hand signs that felt too practiced to be natural. It was not discipline alone that guided them, but something closer to fear. Their faces were worse than their silence. Pale skin stretched tight over hollow features, with dark circles carved deep beneath their eyes. Each glance I managed to catch revealed exhaustion, as if sleep had become something dangerous. I tried speaking again, forcing my voice into the stillness. The words felt heavy, like they did not belong in this place. A monk paused, his shoulders stiffening, but he never turned to face me. Instead, he raised a trembling hand and made a quick, almost desperate gesture. It wasn't just a refusal to speak, it was a warning. Whatever silence they kept, it was not by choice. As the day dragged on, I began noticing something more disturbing. Several monks struggled to stay awake, their heads jerking slightly as they walked. One nearly collapsed before catching himself, his breathing sharp and panicked. They avoided the darker corners of the monastery, especially the long halls that led deeper inside. Whenever their path took them near those shadows, their pace quickened. It was as if something waited there, just beyond the edge of sight. I followed one of them at a distance, watching as he entered a small chamber lined with worn prayer mats. Instead of resting, he knelt and pressed his forehead against the ground, his body shaking uncontrollably. His silent prayer looked more like someone begging for mercy. The unease grew heavier as evening approached. The monks gathered in the courtyard, their movements tense and restless. No rituals, no chants, no evening prayers, only a shared dread that thickened the air. One monk briefly looked up at me, and this time I saw everything clearly. His lips were cracked as if he hadn't spoken in years, but it was his eyes that froze me in place. They were filled with terror, not of me, but of something that had not yet arrived. As darkness settled over the monastery, I understood what they feared. It wasn't the silence nor the isolation of this place. They were afraid of sleep itself, and whatever waited for them on the other side of it. Night did not fall over the monastery. It swallowed it whole. The last traces of daylight vanished too quickly, as if the sun itself refused to linger. A suffocating darkness crept into every corner, thick and watchful. I remained in my room, staring at the candle as its flame trembled. The walls seemed closer than before, closing in with each passing minute. Even the air felt heavier, pressing against my lungs like an unseen weight. Somewhere beyond the door, soft footsteps echoed through the corridors. They moved in restless patterns, never stopping for long. It sounded less like monks preparing for rest, and more like prisoners pacing before an execution. I told myself I would stay awake, no matter what happened. The unease from the day had sharpened into something undeniable. Whatever the monks feared, it was tied to the moment they surrendered to sleep. The candle burned lower, its light flickering wildly, as if reacting to something I couldn't see. Shadows twisted along the walls, stretching into unnatural shapes. I caught myself staring too long, half expecting them to move on their own. Exhaustion crept in slowly despite my determination. My eyelids grew heavy, my thoughts drifting into strange, disconnected fragments. It felt as though sleep was pulling me under against my will. The moment I slipped, everything changed. I was no longer in the room, but standing in a vast, endless darkness. The ground beneath me pulsed faintly, like something alive breathing beneath a thin layer of earth. Figures surrounded me, kneeling in a perfect circle. Their heads were bowed, their bodies trembling in silent agony. Even without seeing their faces, I knew they were the monks. A low sound began to rise, not quite a voice, not quite a whisper. It seeped into my mind rather than my ears, forming words I couldn't fully understand. Yet the meaning was clear. It had been waiting. Something moved beyond the circle, something vast and unseen. Its presence pressed against me, filling me with a terror so deep it felt ancient. I wanted to run, but my body refused to respond. Then, suddenly, every monk lifted their head at once. Their faces were twisted in horror, mouths opening in a scream that shattered the silence. At that exact moment, I realized I was screaming too. I jolted awake to the sound echoing through the monastery. It wasn't just one voice, it was all of them, rising together in perfect unison at exactly 3 a.m. The walls trembled with their terror, and as I listened, I understood the truth that froze my blood. Whatever I had seen, they had seen it too. Morning arrived like a reluctant confession, pale and lifeless. The screams had stopped, but their echo still clung to the walls. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, unsure if waking had truly ended anything. The monastery felt different now, heavier with something unspoken. The monks moved slower than before, their bodies weighed down by invisible chains. None of them met my eyes, as if we now shared something forbidden. I stepped into the corridor, searching for any sign that the night had been a dream. The silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It was burdened. Every passing monk carried the same haunted stillness I felt creeping into my own bones. One of them stumbled as he walked, his hand brushing against the wall for support. For a brief second his sleeve pulled back, revealing something etched into his skin. It looked like a symbol, carved deep and repeated over and over. That was when I knew I needed answers. Fear no longer held me back, it pushed me forward instead. If this place was hiding something, I was already part of it. I waited until the corridors emptied, then began searching the monastery. Behind one of the older chambers, I found a narrow door, half concealed by crumbling stone. It resisted at first, as if it had not been opened in years, before finally giving way. Inside was a small dust-filled room lined with wooden shelves. The air was thick with decay, and the faint smell of ink lingered. Dozens of worn journals were stacked carelessly, their pages yellowed and fragile. I picked one up and opened it carefully, my hands trembling. The writing inside was uneven, rushed as if recorded in desperation. Every page described the same thing, a dream that was far too vivid to be imagined. Different handwriting, different years, but identical details filled each journal. A circle of kneeling figures, a presence watching from the darkness, and a ritual that no one remembered beginning. The words grew more frantic as the entries continued, as though the writers were losing themselves. I grabbed another journal, then another, flipping through them in disbelief. The same dream repeated across decades, unchanged in every detail. It wasn't evolving, wasn't fading. It was being relived exactly as it had first happened. One entry stood out, written more clearly than the others. It described the dream not as a nightmare, but as a memory forced upon them. The final line was scratched deeply into the page, as if carved with desperation. We are not dreaming it. We are remembering it. A cold realization settled over me as the words sank in. Whatever haunted this monastery was not a figment of their minds, and as the silence outside pressed closer to the door, I began to understand something far worse. It was making sure they never forgot. The journals left a single question echoing in my mind, and it refused to fade. If the dream was a memory, then something inside this monastery had created it. I knew the answer wasn't in the rooms above, but buried somewhere deeper. The hidden door behind the archive led to a narrow staircase carved into stone. Each step groaned under my weight, as if warning me to turn back. The air grew colder as I descended, carrying a damp, rotting scent that clung to my skin. Faint markings appeared along the walls, scratched into the stone with uneven hands. They matched the symbols I had seen carved into the monk's arm, repeating endlessly like a desperate attempt to contain something. I ran my fingers across one, and a chill shot through me. The staircase opened into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling stretched high above, swallowed by darkness, while the floor was covered in a massive circular pattern. It was the same circle from the dream, etched into the stone with horrifying precision. At the center stood a blackened altar, cracked and stained with something long dried. The air around it felt wrong, thick with a presence that made my chest tighten. I didn't need proof to know this was where it had begun. Fragments of broken chains lay scattered near the altar, rusted and twisted apart. They looked ancient, yet something about them felt disturbingly recent, as if whatever they once held had not been gone for very long. I heard movement behind me and turned sharply. A group of monks had followed, their silent forms emerging from the shadows. Their faces were drawn tight with fear, their eyes fixed on the altar. One of them stepped forward, his hands trembling as he gestured frantically toward the circle. His movements were desperate, almost pleading, as if he wanted me to understand something without words. Then he slowly shook his head, as though it was already too late. The ground beneath us seemed to hum faintly, vibrating with a low, unnatural rhythm. The markings on the floor began to feel alive, as if they were reacting to our presence. A deep unease spread through me, sharper than anything I had felt before. The dream came rushing back all at once, clearer now than it had been before. The kneeling figures, the circle, the unseen presence watching from the darkness. This wasn't just where the ritual happened, it was the exact moment, frozen in time. A realization struck me with crushing force. The monks hadn't failed to contain the entity, they had trapped themselves with it. The ritual had bound them to this place, forcing them to relive the moment of its awakening every night. The humming grew louder, pulsing through the chamber like a heartbeat. The monks began to step back, their fear turning into quiet panic. And as the darkness above the altar seemed to shift ever so slightly, I understood the truth they had been too terrified to speak. Whatever they had awakened was never truly contained. I should have run the moment I understood the truth. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the chamber and never look back. But something stronger held me there, a pull that felt older than fear itself, and fear. The monks retreated toward the staircase, their movements no longer controlled. Their silence broke into shallow, panicked breaths that echoed through the chamber. For the first time, their discipline collapsed into raw terror. I followed them back to the surface, the oppressive weight of the chamber clinging to me. The corridors seemed longer now, stretching unnaturally as we moved. Shadows gathered along the walls, thickening with every passing second. By the time we reached the courtyard, the sky had already darkened. Night had returned far too quickly, swallowing what little light remained. It felt as though the monastery itself had pulled us back into darkness. The monks gathered once more, but this time there was no order. Some knelt, others clutched their heads, and a few simply stood frozen in place. Their fear was no longer hidden, it was consuming them. I tried to leave through the main gate, but it would not budge. The wood felt fused to the stone, unyielding under all my strength. Panic tightened in my chest as I realized I was trapped. A faint vibration began beneath my feet, subtle at first but impossible to ignore. The same low hum from the chamber echoed upward, filling every corner of the monastery. It was calling us back to that moment. I stumbled as the sound grew louder, my thoughts unraveling under its pressure. Images from the dream forced their way into my mind, sharper and more vivid than before. This time, I could feel everything as if it were real. Without warning, the world shifted again. I was no longer standing in the courtyard but kneeling within the circle. The monks surrounded me, their faces twisted in the same horror I had seen before. The presence returned, closer now, pressing against every part of me. It no longer lingered in the darkness. It was inside the circle with us. I could feel its attention fixed directly on me. One by one, the monks' screams erupted again, louder and more desperate than the night before. But this time something was different. They did not wake. I tried to pull myself free, to open my eyes, but there was nothing to wake up to. The dream did not break, did not fade. It held me in place like a prison. And as the presence drew closer, I understood the final truth with sinking dread. Morning would come, but not for us. The monks would remain trapped in that endless moment, their bodies empty shells above. And as my own voice joined their eternal screams, I realized I had become part of the memory too. Another soul condemned to relive the awakening forever.